She spent 20 years holding everything together quietly, the bills, the budget, the marriage. The night he won the lottery and told her to leave, she smiled. Because she already knew something he didn't. Not every betrayal arrives with shouting. Some betrayals arrive wearing a grin, speaking too fast, already planning a future with no room for you in it. The Carter kitchen had a light that flickered if you didn't press the switch down just right. Evelyn had learned that 4 years ago and never mentioned it to Daniel. She had learned it the way she learned everything, quietly, alone, through careful attention to things no one else tracked. The heater clicked twice before it caught. The second drawer is stuck in winter. The grocery budget never, ever had room for extras. These were Evelyn's facts. The invisible architecture of a shared life that only she had ever mapped. Daniel had always believed that the right moment was coming. That he was built for something bigger than this house, this neighborhood, this budget that never bent. He wasn't a bad man, not exactly. He was a man who had been waiting for permission to become a different version of himself. And on the night he checked those lottery numbers, standing in that flickering kitchen light, he finally felt it. The permission had arrived. What Evelyn noticed first wasn't his joy. It was the speed of it. How fast his face changed. How quickly his voice lost its apology. How he looked at her. Not with cruelty, not yet, but with something worse. Distance. As if she had always been part of the old chapter, and the new one had no room for her. When he asked her to pack her things, she didn't cry. She didn't plead. She walked to the counter, picked up her wallet, and pressed it once between her hands, the way you do with something you want to make sure is still there. She left without a word. And that silence, that is where the story really begins. What Daniel didn't know, what he had never taken the time to know, was that Evelyn had been the one who bought the ticket. That Tuesday evening, at a neighborhood store 3 blocks from home, she had paid in cash, signed the back the way she always did, and slipped it into her wallet without thinking twice. It was a habit. Everything Evelyn did was a habit of careful, quiet protection. And this time, without knowing it, that habit had just changed everything. Wait, before Daniel spends another $1 that isn't his, hit that like button and subscribe. We're chasing 1,000 people smart enough to sign the back of their ticket. Don't be a Daniel. Be an Evelyn. Drop in the comments where you're watching from, and tell me, did you see that twist coming? The heater clicked twice before it caught. The kitchen light threw pale yellow across the linoleum. Outside, January pressed against the windows like something that wanted in. Evelyn was rinsing the last dinner plate when Daniel's chair scraped hard across the floor. Evelyn. Just her name. But her hands went still under the running water. He was standing at the table, phone held out, screen glowing. Mouth open, chest moving fast. The numbers, he said. Evelyn. The numbers. He laughed. Loud. The kind that fills a room without asking. She dried her hands slowly. He was already pacing, already calling his brother, voice cracking with a joy that sounded almost like grief. She watched him move through the kitchen like he'd never been in it before. Maybe it had changed. What she noticed first wasn't the money. It was the 10 minutes that followed. He stopped looking at her. Not cruelly, just the way you stop looking at furniture you've already decided doesn't fit the new space. His sentences dropped her name entirely. I need to call a lawyer tomorrow. Not we. I've been thinking about moving somewhere bigger. Not us. A pressure settled behind her sternum. Low. Specific. You should probably start making arrangements, he said, still looking at his phone. Arrangements, she repeated. He set the phone down. Met her eyes for the first time. This changes things. You understand that. She didn't argue. Didn't raise her voice. Didn't let him see anything. She packed one bag. Took her gray coat, the practical one, bought on sale 3 winters ago. Picked up her purse. Before zipping it, her fingers found her wallet. She pressed it once, the way you check for something you already know is there. She stepped into the cold Chicago night. The door clicked shut behind her, soft, final. almost polite. Her breath came out in slow white clouds. She didn't cry. The thing that keeps you crying is uncertainty. And Evelyn Carter was not uncertain. She had bought that ticket on a Tuesday, signed the back in her own handwriting, slipped it into her wallet the way she did with every small thing that might one day matter. Forgotten about it by Wednesday. She remembered it now. She sat in her car without starting the engine, cold settling around her shoulders, hands steady in her lap. He has no idea. The question wasn't whether she'd do something. It was how far she'd let him go before she said a word, and whether, by the time she did, there would be anything left of him to hear it. Her sister's spare room smelled like lavender fabric softener and old carpet. A single lamp on the nightstand. One window facing a brick wall. Evelyn set her bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed without turning on the light. She could still hear Daniel's laugh in her chest. Not as a memory, but as a physical thing, like a door slammed hard enough to rattle the walls long after it closes. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs and breathed through it. She did not cry. She had managed their finances since the second year of their marriage. Not because Daniel asked her to, because someone had to, and he never noticed the bills until they were overdue. She built spreadsheets he never looked at. She negotiated the car insurance down twice. She moved money quietly between accounts the way a careful person moves through a dark room, slowly without breaking anything. He had called her practical once, in a tone that wasn't quite a compliment. She had said nothing. She was good at that. Across town, Daniel's phone had not stopped ringing. She knew this without seeing it. She could map exactly how the night was unfolding. The brother first, then the work friends, then the ones he hadn't spoken to in years who would suddenly remember his number. She knew him that well. Still, that was the part that sat heavy. Not the betrayal. Not the money. The fact that she had known him well enough to predict every move he would make tonight, and he had never once tried to know her the same way. She opened her purse, found her wallet, slid out the ticket and held it under the thin lamplight from the hallway. Her handwriting on the back, small, even unhurried. She remembered signing it at the store counter while the cashier bagged her groceries. A reflex, the same way she saved receipts, labeled envelopes, kept records of things that might one day matter. She hadn't known that day would be today. She slid it back carefully, closed the wallet, set her purse on the nightstand. The anger was there. She wasn't going to pretend it wasn't. It moved through her slow and hot, looking for somewhere to go. But underneath it, steadier and colder, was something else entirely. Control. She wouldn't call a lawyer tonight. She wouldn't send a message. She wouldn't give Daniel the warning of her voice. Not yet, because the moment he knew she knew, the clock would start. And Evelyn had spent 14 years understanding one thing above all others. Timing is everything. She lay back on the unfamiliar pillow, eyes open in the dark, and made her decision quietly, the way she made every decision that mattered. She would wait. She would watch. She would let him build exactly as high as he wanted to. Because the higher he climbed on something that didn't belong to him, the further he'd have to fall. And she intended to be standing at the bottom, steady and unhurried, when gravity finally caught up. What she hadn't decided yet was how much she'd let him spend before she stepped in. And by morning, that question would have an answer she wasn't expecting. By morning, Daniel Carter was a different man. Not different in the way grief changes people, or loss, or the slow pressure of years. Different the way a drunk man is different. Louder, looser, convinced that everyone in the room is finally seeing him clearly for the first time. He changed his profile picture. Posted publicly. The comments came fast. "Congratulations, bro. You deserve this. King behavior." He screenshot every one. Evelyn saw it from her sister's kitchen. Coffee going cold beside her. Phone flat on the table. She didn't scroll. She didn't need to. She read 3 lines and set it face down. Her jaw was tight. She released it deliberately, the way you release a fist you didn't realize you'd made. Let him. By the 3rd day, Daniel had spoken to a financial advisor he found online, toured an apartment on the north side with floor-to-ceiling windows, and told at least 4 people he was restructuring his life. He used those exact words. She heard it secondhand through a mutual friend who texted, clearly unsure which side she was supposed to be on. Evelyn replied with a single word, "Thanks." Then she drove to the convenience store on Halsted. She introduced herself to the cashier calmly, asked about their security footage retention policy, wrote down the manager's name on a folded receipt she tucked into the inside pocket of her bag, the same pocket where she kept the ticket. She wasn't building a case yet. She was building a timeline. There's a particular kind of danger in watching someone construct a version of reality that has no foundation. You know it will fall. The only question is whether they've attached enough people to it before it does. Daniel had spent 72 hours doing exactly that. And then, on the 4th morning, he walked into the Illinois Lottery Claims Office and officially filed his name as the winner. Public record. Irreversible. Evelyn received a text from her lawyer contact 40 minutes later. 3 words. Has been filed. She read it once, set the phone down, picked up her coffee. Good, she thought. Now the clock starts. What Daniel didn't understand, what he couldn't have understood, because he had never paid close enough attention, was that Evelyn had been ready for this moment since the night she walked out that door. The question now wasn't whether she could prove ownership. It was whether Daniel would have anything left by the time she did. Daniel just walked into a lottery office with someone else's signature. And you're still here, which means you're built different. Share this with one person who needs to see karma work in real time. We're 1,000 subscribers away from proving that the quiet ones always win. Subscribe if you haven't. Evelyn didn't come this far for you to leave now. And drop your location below. Where in the world are you watching Daniel destroy himself from? The lottery office didn't release funds immediately. That was the first thing Daniel hadn't accounted for. There was a verification process. Standard procedure. A claims review that could take days, sometimes longer, depending on the ticket. Evelyn sat across from a lawyer named Patricia Osei in a quiet office on Michigan Avenue. The kind of office where the carpet absorbs sound and the chairs cost more than they look. A glass of water sat untouched on the edge of the desk. Outside, the city moved fast and indifferent through the window behind Patricia's shoulder. "You signed the back?" Patricia asked. "The day I bought it. And you have the purchase record?" Evelyn placed the store receipt on the desk. Flat. Precise. The same way she had placed grocery lists on that kitchen counter for 14 years. Patricia looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at Evelyn. "He has no claim," she said simply. Evelyn nodded once. She already knew. She had needed to hear it said aloud in a room that felt official, that felt real, in a voice that wasn't her own. Meanwhile, Daniel was being loud in all the wrong places. A coworker called him for lunch and he arrived 20 minutes late in a car he didn't own yet, talking about square footage and investment portfolios and a trip to Portugal he was already half planning. The coworker, to his credit, asked a single careful question. "Has it actually cleared yet?" Daniel waved his hand. "It's a formality." It wasn't. The lottery office, quietly, had flagged an inconsistency. The ticket signature didn't match the name on the claim. A letter was prepared. Routine, they called it. Nothing about what was coming was routine. Evelyn learned about the flag through Patricia that same afternoon. She sat with it for a moment, that warm, specific feeling of a thing falling exactly into place, and then asked one question. "How long do I wait before I respond?" Patricia leaned back. Long enough for his position to be fully public. Short enough that nothing gets released. Evelyn picked up her water glass for the first time. Took one slow sip. "Next Friday," she said. Not a question. A decision. She drove back to her sister's in the early dark, the city lights smearing across wet pavement, and felt something she hadn't felt since that night in the flickering kitchen. Steadiness. Complete and quiet and hers alone. Daniel was building louder by the day. More people, more promises, more versions of a life already spent in his imagination. And every brick he added was one more thing that would need to come down. She had set the date. What she hadn't told Patricia, what she hadn't told anyone, was exactly what she planned to say when she finally walked into that room and faced him. That part she was still deciding. The downtown office had the kind of silence that costs money. Glass walls, pale carpet, a conference table long enough to make a person feel small at one end of it. Daniel arrived in a new coat. He sat down with the posture of a man who had already decided how this meeting would end. Chin up, shoulders back, one hand resting loosely on the table like he owned it. The attorney across from him opened a folder without small talk. The documents slid across the table one at a time. Purchase timestamp, store location.
Signature vérification.
Daniel looked at the first page. Then the second. His hand on the table stopped moving. He didn't speak. He just looked. The way a person looks when the ground beneath an argument they've been standing on simply disappears. No collapse. No sound. Just the sudden, terrible stillness of a man realizing that every move he'd made for the past 2 weeks had been built on something that was never his. The door behind him opened. He didn't turn around immediately. Maybe he already knew. Evelyn sat down across from him. No performance. No triumph on her face. Just the same steadiness she'd carried out of that kitchen. The same expression she wore when she managed the bills, the budgets, the invisible weight of a shared life he'd never bothered to notice. She folded her hands on the table. The attorney looked between them and said nothing. For a long moment, neither did Evelyn. And then, for the first time since the night he told her to leave, she spoke. What she said next wasn't what Daniel expected. It wasn't what anyone expected. And it would change the outcome of everything that followed in a way that had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with the 14 years that came before it. "I'm not here to take anything from you," Evelyn said. She said it the way she said most things that mattered. Quietly, without theater, eyes steady on his face. "I'm here because what's mine needs to be documented as mine. That's all this is." Daniel opened his mouth, closed it. She continued, "I didn't plan this. I bought that ticket on a Tuesday because I buy a ticket every few weeks. I signed the back because I always sign the back. That's not a trap, Daniel. That's just who I am. Someone who pays attention. Someone who prepares." She let that sit. His new coat suddenly looked like a costume. His posture, which had carried him through 2 weeks of celebration and entitlement, seemed to require more effort now. He was holding himself up differently. Not with confidence, but with the last scraps of pride a person grips when everything else has already gone. "I kept that household together for 14 years, she said. Not with anger, just a fact. Every late bill, every tight month, every decision you never knew needed making because I made it before you had to see it." She unfolded her hands and set them flat on the table. "You didn't lose the money, Daniel. You never had it. What you lost." She paused, not for effect, but because the words required space. "Was the one person who actually knew how to hold your life together." He said nothing. There was nothing to say. She stood, buttoned her coat, the gray one, the practical one, picked up her bag and walked to the door. No hesitation. No backwards glance. This time, she wasn't walking out into uncertainty. She was walking into everything she'd already quietly built while he was busy celebrating. The money would be processed. The legal matter would close. But the question that would stay with Daniel long after the paperwork settled, longer than the embarrassment, longer than the consequence, was not about the ticket at all. It was whether he had ever truly seen her, and whether, if he had, any of this would have happened. 6 months later, Evelyn Carter bought a plant. A small one. Ceramic pot, white glaze, set on the windowsill of an apartment that was entirely hers. The lease, the utilities, the coffee maker she'd always wanted and never justified. Morning light came through clean windows and landed on her kitchen counter without flickering. She made her coffee, sat down, opened her laptop. Her finances were organized in a spreadsheet, so she didn't have to hide or compress or quietly reroute around someone else's carelessness. The numbers were honest. They were growing. Not dramatically, not lottery ticket dramatically, but steadily, the way things grow when someone who actually understands them is finally free to tend to them properly. Daniel faded the way people do when they lose the thing that was holding them together without knowing it. No dramatic collapse. No public reckoning. Just a series of smaller losses, the apartment he couldn't sustain, the friends who moved on, the version of himself he tried to build on a foundation that was never his. She heard about it once secondhand. Didn't ask for details. People sometimes ask what it feels like to hold something that significant, that quietly, for that long. It doesn't feel like power. Not the way people imagine power feels. It feels like knowing which switch to press so the light doesn't flicker. It feels like the second drawer and the grocery budget and the sign back of a ticket no one thought to check. It feels like being exactly who you always were, and finally having the space to let that be enough. Some people lose everything the moment they think they've won. Evelyn Carter simply waited for that to become true. And now, sitting in her own light, in her own silence, in a life she had built with the same quiet hands that held everything else together, the only question left was the one she turned back to you. What would you have done in her place? Evelyn bought a plant. Daniel lost everything. And you just watched the quietest revenge in history. If the story hits differently, like, subscribe, and share it with somebody who needs to remember that the overlooked ones are always paying attention. We're so close to 1,000, don't let us get there without you. Comment below, where are you watching from, and what would you have done with that ticket?